I'm not sure if you can see my face anymore. I think you can just see the PowerPoint. But I'm here to speak about my dissertation that's now been published. I went to Nottingham Trent University and I studied psychology of criminology. And yeah, I did this dissertation in my last year, my 4th year, and alongside my tutor Preethi. So she's also here as well. Do you want to introduce yourself?
So yes, I'm Preethi Premkumar. I'm a senior lecturer at London South Bank University. I was a senior lecturer at Nottingham Trent University where I supervised Teni, and yeah, we worked on this project together. It was Teni's idea, and then we took it forward to publication. So yeah, my background is I do research on family relationships, but I'm now also the lead for equality and diversity and inclusivity at my school, and I'm particularly interested in addressing experiences of students and staff of Black, Asian, and other ethnic minorities.
Okay, let's get into it. So I decided on this topic as it was a very personal topic to me. At the time, I had suffered with poor mental health, living as a Christian, Black, British, African female university student. Having these pressures, it negatively impacted my mental health as I lived with a constant battle in my mind, knowing I was feeling depressed and anxious. I lived with my parents, and they just couldn't comprehend mental illness. They couldn't comprehend mental health. They couldn't comprehend depression and anxiety. They understood being depressed as being sad, but you can snap yourself out of it, and being anxious as a feeling of being scared, but again can snap yourself out of it. This coupled with being a Christian and learning that you give your worries to God and He'll take care of it was confusing, but I soon found out it was a feeling a lot of people felt. Um, Further to this, my parents living in Nigeria for the first 20 years of their life and then moving to the UK when where things are so different to their normal, this added to the pressure I was feeling. It felt like their beliefs were so opposite to mine, which in a way dumbed down my beliefs and made the way I felt even more confusing and led me to start feeling afraid to talk about the way I felt. It wasn't until I got to college and I started studying psychology that my mental health started to make sense to me. There were studies and research out there that I could discuss with my peers, but it didn't feel like it was making an impact on the beliefs held about mental health in the wider Black community, especially the older generation. Why weren't people talking? Why weren't people educating themselves? The information is out there. It felt like we were staying stagnant rather than moving forward. And this was a common feeling a lot of people in my position felt. Um, so to conclude, I decided on this topic because I felt like it was needed. It was something I looked for and I couldn't find. It hopefully will contribute to the necessary change in the mental and physical health world, and most of all, it will remove the fear from people talking about their mental health. So why are people afraid to talk? Through research, speaking to peers, and my own personal experience, I'm sure we can all say that globally people are afraid to talk about their mental health because of lack of education. People might not know about it enough, or maybe don't want to say the wrong things. They could also have a strong belief that it's based on experiences and even word of mouth rather than factual information. Some people might even have a strong belief and just don't want their belief to be swayed or influenced. Different and opposite beliefs to peers and family. I think depending on an individual's nature, having a different or opposite belief to the people around you can almost silence you, especially if your belief is the minority. A lack of a safe space, whether this be inside or outside of your home, having a safe space where you feel heard is so important, generally and in relation to mental health. If you can't speak to the closest people around you, who can you speak to? Not feeling represented. I think as a minority in any country, this can create a fear because you don't see people like you. You question whether the majority can understand your thoughts, your feelings, and your struggles. But I think this is a responsibility of minorities to step into roles that lack so that they can become part of the representation. And then lastly, I think stigma is a big one for why people are afraid to talk. Unfortunately, there's a negative stigma attached to having a mental health issue in and outside of the Western world. The more this stigma is prominent, the more potential there is for people to fear talking about their mental health. So the research objectives for my dissertation, we aim to understand what constitutes mental illness, how stigma of mental illness is experienced, how people cope with poor mental health using religion and other means, attitudes towards seeking help for mental health problems too. These themes were explored in relation to what it means to be a person of African, Caribbean, and ethnic heritage in the Western world. So this is some of the research that we found that was included in the dissertation. So Stowe et al., he was, I think they found that university students of African, Caribbean, and ethnic heritage in the UK encountered inequalities through a distorted learning experience, such as the lack of relatedness to the majority of academic staff and students who are of European descent. They also felt that the ACE students also felt estranged in the UK and relatedly experienced depression, loneliness, stress, and insomnia. As well as this, they were reluctant to seek help from European descent health practitioners because of potential racial stereotypes. Smith et al. Also found that the lack of family support could delay access to mental health services. Mills and Edwards found that older African Americans were likely to experience poor mental health arising from the historical legacy of slavery and perceived trauma. And then Mantovani et al. Found that people of African, Caribbean, and ethnic heritage may not seek mental health support because African descended faith communities regard mental illness as a moral failing and a spiritual weakness. And the mental illness is thought to occur from not having enough faith in God. So I conducted a qualitative study which was ethically approved by Nottingham Trent University Ethics Committee. I put together a short questionnaire for demographic information and then carried out a semi-structured interview that lasted about 60 minutes each, and there were about 18 questions asked. Some examples of the questions asked were, how important is the term mental health to you, and how can Black stereotypes such as Black people are aggressive affect the possible misdiagnosis of a mental illness? The sampling technique was a purposive sample. Each participant was selected because they had specific characteristics that I needed in my sample, such as being Black British or Black African and living in the UK. All participants were recruited through student adverts and pamphlets handed out at an African Caribbean Society meeting. The participants included 6 university students, 3 men and 3 women, aged between 22 and 55. These participants had lived in the UK from birth, and 3 participants had moved from their country of origin to make UK their permanent residence. Here's some additional socio-cultural characteristics of the participants. And I think I'm handing over to Preethi from here. Preethi, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'll share my screen. So the data was analyzed using a critical realist social construction approach. And the theoretical assumptions are that data can reveal reality, but not as a direct mirror. It assumes that social interaction is what creates the reality. And so we followed the method of Braun and Clark, and there were 6 stages of thematic analysis. Essentially, they explored the participants' defined meanings. So we had 5 themes. The themes were perceived meanings and attitudes towards mental health problems, beliefs about the non-existence of mental health problems and their spiritual attributions, family dynamics and the silencing of mental health problems, help seeking for mental health among people of African, Caribbean, and similar ethnicity, and lastly, stigma and discriminatory responses to mental health issues. So the first theme, perceived mental meanings and attitudes towards mental health problems. So one of the extracts was a lot of Black cultures, like African and Caribbean cultures, tend to look down on mental health, tend to see it as something negative. A lot of our cultures are influenced by slavery and religion. I think some of those religions and some of the doctrines in the past have given the Black community the impression that mental health is an indication that something is evil or something to be stayed away from. So, this view seems to suggest that mental health is part of an exported culture from the West into African and Caribbean cultures, and that uh, this exported belief about mental health can in turn impact on the indigenous local African and Caribbean cultures. And there's also reference to slavery and colonialism, and those concepts seem to inform a negative perception of mental health. The next theme was beliefs about the non-existence of mental health problems and their spiritual attributions. So one remark was, I don't believe in it, and that's why it doesn't mean a whole lot to me. And another comment was lack of awareness, that lack of not wanting to simply acknowledge that mental health exists. It's not the devil trying to overtake a person. Mental illnesses are real, very real. So this view that mental health issues may not actually exist can risk undermining the negative consequences of mental health problems. And both these views suggest that on the one hand, people of African, Caribbean, and similar ethnicities may not acknowledge it, may not acknowledge mental health problems, but on the other hand, it is a real issue. And if it's left unaddressed, it can lead to serious problems. And these views tend to downplay mental health as a serious societal problem by trivializing its impact. The next theme was family dynamics and the silencing of mental health problems. And here it was expressed, they'll brush it off like you're crazy kind of thing. And that doesn't help, especially if the person is struggling within themselves. I knew that if I told my parents, they'd talk me out of that way of thinking and probably tell me I need to pray more about it. So family settings and cultural expectations do not produce a conducive means to talk about mental health problems. And, young people can be fearful to share with families if the families themselves don't acknowledge the impact of mental health. And it also hints at a intergenerational gap in understanding mental illness. It suggests that by parents being ignorant of the suffering from these mental health problems, uh, they are not supporting it, and instead they're advocating spiritual solutions. Another theme was help seeking for mental health among people of African, Caribbean, and similar ethnic heritage. I think it's very important to have someone that you feel safe around, someone that you feel understands you. I think it can be hard, especially as a Black person, to go out and get help from someone that comes from a completely different socioeconomic background to you, and a different religious background, and a different racial background, because what tends to happen is you feel that they don't understand where you're coming from. So this highlights the challenges that Black people can face, especially because of their mental health issues not being understood, and when they're trying to seek help from a professional who is from a different cultural background to themselves. And the last theme was stigma and discriminatory responses to mental health issues. I think a big thing the stigma suffered from mental health problems is the embarrassment. They're just kind of ashamed. They don't want the shame. They don't want to sort of be seen in a certain way. And sometimes people can, I guess, be a bit proud and a bit conscious about how they're going to be viewed. There's a stigma attached to it, mental health issues, because the people you know have a detached perspective to it due to stigma and discrimination. You know, they look at someone with a mental health issue and they look at it like, okay, this cannot be me. There's something wrong with that person. So, what these views suggest is that retaining one's relationship with other people is more important than disclosing issues with mental health. So, because of the stigma attached to mental health, people tend to conceal it, and they're afraid of being excluded, and they'd rather salvage their relationships than suffer the stigma of mental health. And so it's presents a challenge when disclosing these mental health problems, and it leads to stigma, and there is the risk of losing friends and peers. So to discuss these findings, so the first theme, the perceived meaning and attitudes towards mental health, there was the reference to slavery and the idea that Western religion has forced itself into the Black culture, and it may cause university students of African, Caribbean, and similar ethnic heritage in the UK to have a negative perception of mental health. Secondly, the non-existence of mental health problems and seeking spiritual explanations. Severe mental illnesses such as psychosis or having suicidal tendencies are believed by people of African, Caribbean, and similar ethnic heritage to be caused by external forces such as the devil, and are believed to require spiritual intervention. So there is still this belief that some spiritual explanations are given to these mental health problems. It is a spiritual force and it needs to be dealt with spiritually. And the third theme was complex family dynamics among people of African, Caribbean, and similar heritage. Family stigma and spirituality are potential barriers to mental health and help seeking. And African American families report less knowledge of mental health problems, and it highlights negative experiences of caregiving. So the recommendations are to raise awareness and reawaken interest in mental health education through campaigns. Students of African and Caribbean heritage and similar ethnicities and their families must be encouraged to talk about mental health problems. And families of students of African, Caribbean, and similar ethnic heritage must be educated about stigma of mental health and how to understand the mental health problems. So thank you for listening. Any questions?
Thank you ever so much. That's fantastic.
Okay.
I've written a couple of questions and comments down, but I'll open up to the group first. Does anyone have any questions at all for Preethi or Teni? Oh, well, while people are thinking about questions, I wondered whether one of the other recommendations perhaps is about representation within the student mental health services on campus, or whether that was something that you'd thought about and discussed about as part of your paper.
Teni, do you want to say something?
Sorry, do you want to repeat the question, please?
Yeah, it was just I wondered whether another recommendation on from what you've mentioned in that last slide was about representation and having staff representing your communities as well, and also a sort of added question, particularly given you've recently been a student, is whether you felt, say at Nottingham, that there was that representation on the student wellbeing services there.
I mean that's a major recommendation. I feel like as I said, representation is so important, but if it wasn't for the research I did myself and for my peers, the conversation I had with my peers, I probably wouldn't have ever sought help.
Yeah.
Because when I went to, firstly, in fact, I didn't even know you could just go to a doctor's surgery and speak about like depression and anxiety. And when I even went to the doctor's surgery, just for like anything unrelated to mental health, and when you look at posters and stuff, you don't tend to see people that look like you in those posters. So I don't know, it being in a doctor's surgery just never, it didn't feel comfortable. It didn't feel like a safe enough space for me to be open enough about my mental health. It wasn't until I spoke to someone else that had gone to doctor's surgery and spoke about their mental health that I thought, if she can do it, I guess it's open enough for me to do it as well. And I eventually did do it. And I think I spoke to Preethi as well when I was really suffering in my final year. But again, that she's not, like, she's an ethnic person, so I think that added to the comfortability of speaking to her over, I guess, going to the doctor's surgery and stuff. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Can I add to
Apologies
that
for the
as
noise.
well?
I've got a cleaner coming around, so there's a vacuum cleaner going along.
Yeah.
That's okay. Can I add to that as well? Yeah. Well, I just remember at that time, it was a big burden on Teni, but I don't understand mental health problems myself, even though I am of an ethnic minority. I couldn't relate to her struggles. And yeah, I found, yeah, you know, even I felt a bit isolated sometimes myself as a member of staff, felt, you know, minoritized. So those are issues. I don't know how it is now in Nottingham Trent. I think there is more effort to make it more diverse. I think, you know, it is a bigger voice. I think that is a change happening. And I think Dung, our other collaborator, he's still a senior lecturer at NTU. So he's away on field work abroad, so he couldn't attend. So he might have been able to answer that question about student representation. But I know at my university in London South Bank, it's very diverse community. The student body is very, very diverse. And that just reflects the local area. It's a very migrant culture there. So it's and there is a very strong voice for Black and Asian ethnic minorities there. So the student body, student reps are like the main student rep is of a Black background, and yeah, so it's very different. So I suppose it differs from institution to institution.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I just wanted to add to that, sorry, just before you ask your second question.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't want it to make it look like we're like bashing Nottingham Trent at all, because
no,
I guess like it's the best they know. They're doing the best they can do, because like with research like this, as I said, I want this research to create more people to like lead people to make more research that can be brought to the forefront and make people think, wait, actually, we've been doing this a certain way for so long. Let's try and change things around and make it applicable to more people. So yeah.
No, thank you.